As far as infrastructure is concerned, many think that Amtrak can do so much to improve infrastructurally, but honestly they can only do so much. Amtrak doesn't own all of the tracks that it rides on. For most freight corridors, it relies on something called trackage rights, which is the permission for a railroad to operate trains over another corridor. Now, Amtrak uses a lot of freight railroads. The freight railroads own the property and are usually footing the bill for maintenance. And as such, you can expect a variation in the quality of the tracks that you ride on when you use an Amtrak train. For instance, if you ride the Silver Service from Miami to New York, you're going to be riding over the Northeast Corridor, which is Amtrak owned, and usually that is maintained to passenger standards. You're also going to be riding over the South Florida Rail Corridor, which is owned by the state of Florida and also maintained to passenger standards, but you will also ride on the CSX main line for most of the way, which means that you will be riding on tracks that are maintained by freight for a varying amount of freight trains per day, which means that some tracks are in better shape than others. When you ride an Amtrak train, you usually ride on tracks that are pre-built and date back to the early 1900s. Now, it is perfectly ideal to try to build a straight shot bullet train 200-mile-an-hour track from one city to another in the United States, right? As ideal as it may seem, it is very difficult, and that's why that corridors such as the Northeast Corridor rely on tracks that have existed since the late 1800s, and as such we have to deal with certain speed restrictions such as the 50-mile-an-hour curve in Frankfort, Pennsylvania. As far as mitigating that, that's where PTC comes in. PTC is the main technological solution that allows trains to stop on emergency and could have even prevented the recent disaster. Now, for PTC to be implemented, that's also ideal, and that's actually federally required to be done by the end of 2015. It is still not going to be the perfect system, as with anything that's technological, and that's why we still need human interaction with the train in order to continue day-to-day operations.
I visited the financial section of Amtrak and it was in complete shambles. There is only one annual report for the fiscal year 2013 and no others. The rest of the so-called reports provided the financials page deal with monthly performance reports, environmental health and safety reports, various plans, and grant funding requests. The disorganization of Amtrak's financials is a major indicator of just the kind of management and organization skills that reflects Amtrak as a company. In contrast, I have noticed that JR East's annual reports are very organized and reflect vital financial information to its investors for all years starting with 2001. The reports provided by JR East are all consistent and any financial information is easy to locate. JR Central and JR West's annual reports are set up in a similar manner, everything being accurate and simple to read. There may be a reason why Amtrak is very secretive about its financial history. Attempts to hide fiscal reports have been historically correlated with severe loss in profit and revenue, normally resulting in the dissolution of a private company. Amtrak seems to be kept afloat artificially thanks to its publicly funded government status and heavy subsidies. Otherwise, it would have been dissolved years ago. With Amtrak's founding on May 1st, 1971, it is suspicious that no recent financial information is provided relating to its debt, revenue, and profit for 44 years. It's not just mismanagement, it's advanced mismanagement.
Progress is what Amtrak really needs now. They can't be relying on freight trackage to use their own passenger service. They need their own dedicated tracks so they can run either long distance or short distance trains without having tie-up between freight and passenger, mostly because freight has a priority over passenger. Companies are trying to implement like the ICE-1, or they have the French electric engines, which was called the X996. Some of these couldn't even run on our infrastructure because it was just so poor. As far as the speed, it's kind of embarrassing. Even the Amtrak Acela, it's very slow in today's time. In Europe, from the distance that Amtrak Acela covers is almost cut down in half for what Europeans go through. And that's what I hope as far as speed, that's what we can go for. Back in the old days, steam was doing 120 on a journey trip, but today it's almost not even, I would say 30s technology. Something as far as speed needs to be achieved so that way passengers can have the advantage over other stuff, so they're not tied up to like being too slow.
Politically, primarily Democratic districts constitute the vast majority of Amtrak passengers. However, Republicans possess the majority in the House of Representatives. Since Amtrak is not necessarily among the constituents, Amtrak is not considered a pressing issue for them. If a more effective method of rail, like high-speed rail, were implemented, these politicians would have greater incentive to focus their efforts on train systems. The political divide with regard to high-speed rail exists at both federal and state levels of government. For example, in the states of New Jersey and Florida, Governors Chris Christie and Rick Scott, respectively, rejected their offers to implement government-funded high-speed rail in their states. They deemed that the project was too expensive, and because of all the government taxes that will be put to create the high-speed rail system, since it will be government-funded, despite all of the commercial and economic benefit every rail line would bring. President Obama advocates for high-speed rail, but not so seriously though, but pretty squabbles around among this the political parties is short-circuiting any potential progress. In the light of the recent Amtrak accident in Philadelphia, Amtrak funding has been brought to the forefront of public interest. Although the reason for the crash has been determined to be that the train was operating over twice the speed limit, questions have nonetheless been raised about the country's current infrastructure. House Speaker John Boehner has downplayed the need for upgrades, saying that adequate funds were there. Bipartisan support for trains will be required to break the gridlock and make actual improvements to one of the most important ways of transportation in the country.
As a frequent rider of Amtrak, I'm front and center as a consumer within it. Nowhere akin to a frequent buyer of Apple or Sony products do I have proud or loyal feelings, but rather that of, Walmart. I'm forced to go there because I don't really have another choice of where to pick of where I go on a train in the United States. It's a culture many riders of Amtrak share. They use it because it's there and they wish they had a better choice. Sadly, the attitude within the Amtrak business culture is more or less the same. In a recent article in the National Journal, when CEO of Amtrak, Joseph H. Boardman, was asked about if the job is frustrating, he begins to cry. Literally, cry.
I never wanted this job in the first place. It's frustrating, It's frustrating. It really is.
You can question if it's apocryphal or not, but the leaders of Amtrak aren't exactly captains of industry here. The image of Amtrak's business is not of innovation, leadership, community, and profitability, but rather just providing a bare-bones service and surviving as a government entity. Long-term visions of high-speed rail and other services are sporadically mentioned or never carried out seriously, as in 2010 and 2012. Within nearly 45 years of existence, Amtrak has not been able to push out anything innovative and game-changing compared with Asian and European counterparts within that span of time. High-speed trains that Amtrak did have, such as Turbo Train and Turbo Liner, were scrapped and never improved on. We understand that Amtrak is both under political and financial pressure to an extent, but with its business plan being on short-term thinking and survival mode, we can see why its majority stakeholders, being Republicans in Congress, see it wasteful to spend any more money. As the age-old adage goes, giving a man a fish will feed him for a day, but teaching him how to fish will feed him for a lifetime. The solution? Amtrak needs to go fishing, metaphorically. The whole culture of its business needs to be ripped from the roots and completely reset, whether by lean business solutions, privatizing certain lines and sections of Amtrak, or completely getting rid of routes, such as Sunset Limited, that are detrimental to its bottom line. If the Silver Star or Silver Meteor need to take a break off service for a while in order to restructure its business plan, then let it be so. Setting difficult goals and long-term consumer-minded lines of business, such as updating the interiors, adding Wi-Fi, and partnering with companies like maybe Netflix or Amazon. This is one of the many solutions that Amtrak needs to undertake in order to change it into a more fundamentally profitable company.